Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome. Good morning to all colleagues, friends who joined us today. We're starting the second series of our webinar from today. This is the first session of the second series, and we take up on a very important agenda today, understanding carbon markets and potential for Pakistan. This time around, we're keeping it very precise, concise, to the point, just talking to the crux, to actually the points which matter. We have two presenters today. One is the CEO of NDRMF, Mr. Bilal Anwar, whom brings with him a lot of international experience, especially in the field we're going to be talking about today. And that too, from internationally different regions and different countries across continents. Followed with him, we have a representation of the UNFCCC RCC today. We have with us is Umama Krishna. So he looks after the Article 6, and he is the carbon pricing regional expert. He is also joining us today. So we'll have two presentations. The intention of NDRMF as an enabling environment, as a platform from the government side, is to bridge between government and private sector and to take on this very important agenda, which is the need of the hour, the net zero and the carbon markets. And we're just starting. So in this particular session, all we'll be focusing on today will be on what is the national context today, where do we stand, what is exactly meant by carbon markets, the potential for Pakistan, given its own dynamics, and then Pakistan within the Asia-Pacific region as well, then moving towards later in the international market, so to say. So we'll be touching upon the international markets, what carbon markets are all about, what carbon credits are. And during that entire stuff, we would want to hear from our presenters today on what is compliance markets, what is voluntary, and what is compliance, what are NDCs, how do they get connected, what are the policy decisions which the country needs to undertake, and how to proceed further given the potential we have. We all know that Pakistan is one of the few countries which have emissions less than 1%, but that's on a global trend and on a global comparison. When we look at the country and compare it to itself, then we see what is the emission rate there and what is the mitigation opportunities there coming up onto that things. So looking at that potential on how much can we go at, and then a little touching upon, my request to the presenters would be to enlighten us on the fact of the companies, especially from private sector, which we will talk in detail in the second webinar on the ideology of moving towards net zero in certain cases by offsetting and by reducing emissions. So the two topics. So in a nutshell, what we are looking for today out of this webinar is an overall idea on the first step, on moving towards the carbon markets, on moving towards understanding what carbon markets are, how can Pakistan play an important role, and what are the opportunities for Pakistan? I'd like to stop here, and I'd like to request Mr. Bilal Anwar, who is the CEO of the National Disaster Risk Management Fund under the Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiative, Government of Pakistan, to actually enlighten us by setting the stage, giving us the national scenarios, and to move on with his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Bilal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fawad. Am I audible? Can you hear me properly?
Yes, you are loud and clear. Please go ahead, G. Please proceed.
Okay. And the second question in these kind of sessions, of course, is my presentation is visible?
Yes, for now it is. Please go ahead with that as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Fawad. And as I already have been introduced, I'm Bilal Anwar. I'm the CEO of National Disaster Risk Management Fund. Previously, I happened to be in the UNFCCC team quite a while back, and the team which actually was responsible for Article 6, 12, and 17 of the Kyoto Protocol, which basically set the entire global context and the regime for a clean development mechanism, which basically triggered and which paved the way for global carbon markets. But that was some time ago, and it's really nice. It's really satisfying to see that how this this instrument, the carbon markets, have evolved since then. So I mean, what is happening right now in the market or in the global climate policy context is there's one aspect, one issue which is being discussed and which is being highlighted as a matter of grave concern is the financing part of it. The Paris Agreement sets the limit, and the science and the IPCC reports have actually very credibly and very strongly shown what kind of temperature increase scenarios we can go up to. And so far, the picture doesn't look very, very bright in that sense. But I think the one associated topic and the concern actually remains that where the financing is going to come from. So the carbon markets are one kind of a piece into this global finance infrastructure, so to call. They're not going to be providing a kind of a substantial amount of funding, especially when it comes to the adaptation side of things. But we know for sure, and this is something which I'll be demonstrating in my presentation as well to some extent, that the carbon markets actually can fill quite an important gap on the mitigation side. And it can actually evolve to become what is called or what is known as a transitional finance moving towards the mitigation actions. So there is a potential, and that potential can be filled up, that can be addressed through the carbon market. But we all know for sure that the carbon markets are complex to operate, and it is very complex for anyone to operate in those markets. So I think the very first question, which is a slightly kind of a theoretical question, is why markets for climate action? We know that the reason behind the climate change or the impacts of the climate change, we see there is environmental degradation and the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for the last 300-400 years. And the very justifiable argument of the question, of course, is that if the whole challenge, the whole problem has been created by the markets, then how we seeing the markets actually coming as a solution part of it. So when we look at it theoretically, when we look into the kind of linkages between economic growth and environmental aspects, there is this unbroken, inextricable linkage between economic growth and the environmental cost to the society. Economists know it very well. This is nothing new, but this has been into the discussion that there is something called which is externalities, and environmental externalities are one of the key externality, which actually is one of those byproducts, one of those spillovers. It can be positive, it can be negative, which the society has.
Bilal, we've lost you. Can you hear us? Bilal, you got to unmute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, Fawad, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, G. Please go ahead, G. So we lost you for about 30-40 seconds. So you'll have to repeat the last 30-40 seconds, please. Thank you.
Yes, so apologies. I think the internet connection is slightly shaky today. So what I was talking about, the environmental externalities. So externality, as we know already, it is something, it can be positive, it can be negative, but this is something that reflected, it's not fully incorporated into the price and the cost of any product or any service. In this particular case, when we're talking about the environmental externalities, this is a negative externality. So when we are buying a product, we're buying a service.
Sorry for interrupting. We don't have your presentation on the slideshow right now. So if you can share that. All right, we have it now. We have it on screen.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So in the concept, in the concept of externalities, that somehow, because it is not automatically, it's not reflected, incorporated into the price of a product or service, so that somehow needed to be addressed. And we know for sure that the climate change or the environmental cost to any society is an externality. And so over the period, what we have seen that a number of regulations, a number of policies have been erected, have been designed to address this particular issue. So this basically is to internalize the externalities, and that basically has given birth or paved the way for policies such as quantity regulations or carbon pricing mechanisms. We are exclusively talking about the carbon pricing mechanism because we all know that the quantity regulations, what they are, and they have been applied in a number of cases, and we see them around us when the governments actually come up with these kind of. So the carbon pricing, they come in different formats, carbon taxes, levies, but there is something which is called cap and trade mechanisms, and that was basically is the carbon mechanisms or the carbon market mechanism, which we'll be talking about. When we, just to give you a little bit of a context, when we look into the how it is being seen, the role for carbon markets in the Paris decarbonization or the Paris Global Agreement or the target, which is keeping the global average temperatures between 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrades, preferably between up to the 1.5 degrees. That basically demand that calls for a very large scale reductions into the GHG emissions. So there are several studies out there and there's several numbers there, and they all are with some kind of a variation, more or less same, and they basically pass on the very similar message. But most of the data and most of the information which I'm presenting in today's presentation, this is actually coming from two different sources. One is the McKinsey report, the famous McKinsey report, and they've been actually very active, and they've been doing these kind of market analytical work for quite some time. Once upon a time, those people who have been active in the carbon markets for some time, they know that the McKinsey curves became very famous a few years ago, and they actually provided quite a lot of insights into the policy actions, global policy actions. So basically what we are seeing here is this demand or this call for net zero by 2050, which basically needs from the current scenario, it needs around 23 gigatons of GHG emissions to be reduced by 2030, and then another 50% to be reduced to reach the target of net zero by 2050. So that's quite a significant call. That's quite a significant demand for cutting down the emissions. And if we see the analysis which is coming from the NDC reports, the synthesis report of NDC, UNFCCC, and we see the trend, we're seeing that there is absolutely no chance with the business as usual, or even the commitments which have been made by the international, by the global communities, that we are going to be meeting, or we're going to be kind of keeping ourselves limited to that kind of emissions range. So this is quite a point, and this is quite a concerning point, and this has been addressed, this has been discussed at various levels at the international level. And wherever the discussion is happening, because ultimately whenever we're talking about the cutting the emissions, it basically leads to the financing of it, because the most of the emissions which are going to be cut, of course, from the industrialized countries, but the future emissions are going to be coming from the developing countries, and those developing countries, they will need quite a significant
Unmute this.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. We lost for a second. We can't see you.
Yeah, Fawad, can you hear me?
G, we can hear you now. And
yeah,
and we can see your presentation.
I switched off I switched off my video, so
All right, all right.
yeah, I switched off my video. I think it's somehow the system is not really the bandwidth is not supporting, so I think that should be helpful. Slightly more
All right, please go ahead.
So yeah, so I think that there's a big discussion which is happening about the financing gaps, and again, there are numbers out there which actually runs into, especially when we're talking about the mitigation actions, they run into trillions of dollars per annum up to 2030, and then it basically goes into more exponential increase when we're talking about from 2030 to 2050, which is the target for net zero. And once again, it is very well understood that, especially for mitigation, that the carbon markets can play quite a influential role, and again, providing the kind of financing or the transitional financing in the mitigation side of things. So I think when we look into this kind of daunting picture of reducing emissions, and when we look at the financing which is available out there from public and non-public and concessional financing, the role and the scope for carbon markets become quite significant, quite an important one. So I think this is being increasingly recognized, and that's one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of attraction and a lot of new players, and the companies actually going towards carbon markets. So just to explain you a little bit about the principle of cap and trade. So it's a market-based approach, and this is basically used for controlling the emissions by setting a ceiling on the total pollutant emissions and providing an economic incentive. So basically the philosophy behind here is, or the technical aspect of it, it basically provides the economic incentives for reducing the emissions in a very flexible way as well. So in a cap and trade system, the participants are allowed to trade emissions. So that basically triggers that incentivize emissions to be reduced wherever there is economically more efficient to reduce. And then under their compliance or under compliance requirements, those emissions can of course be traded with other participants or with other stakeholders or market players who might need or who will be needing the emissions or the carbon credits for their compliance purposes. So they are basically, I think, the two other concepts, two other elements which needed to be understood here is, one is the carbon credit and the other one is carbon offset. So just to explain you the carbon offsets first, the offset basically is it's a mechanism. It involves reducing the net carbon emissions by buying the rights to emit through GHG projects, and they are project-based emissions reductions, and they can be used depending on where a project is registered. They can be used both on voluntary as well as regulatory markets. Whereas the carbon credit is a financial instrument, and any carbon credit is equivalent to or holds the value of the right to emit 1 metric ton of CO2, or the reduction of one ton of the carbon CO2. So I think this is it's a basic, as a fundamental to understand the kind of a difference between it. So the whole concept behind is that to set up a market or let the market to evolve and let reductions to happen in a project-based scenario wherever it is economically more efficient to do so, and then in parallel to set up a mechanism to have a functioning mechanism which basically allows those carbon credits or those financial instruments to be traded and to be bought and exchanged so that they can be used for different purposes. So based on this principle, a thriving and a vibrant carbon market has evolved in the last 10-15 years, and not only the regulatory market, but the voluntary carbon markets is also very much thriving as well. And I'll show that the number of new initiatives which are being undertaken, which are being established all over the world. Now, the voluntary market which may sound a slightly less complicated. In reality, they are not actually that less complicated, and they are very much built on the policy and regulatory infrastructure of the regulatory market. If we're talking about VCM, VCM is highly built on the infrastructure of the CDM, the Clean Firmament Mechanism, which basically provided and which basically established the global carbon market. So participants use those credits for different purposes, both for compliance as well as non-compliance purposes. When we're talking about the non-compliance purposes, they are basically for sustainability objectives, and the corporate sector especially, they use it for their sustainability as well as ESG and CSR reporting purposes as well. But at the same time, there are a number of initiatives which do recognize and they do consider even the voluntary carbon market credits as part of their compliance instruments as well. So I think I already explained a little bit about the difference between the compliance versus voluntary market. I'm sure that you'll be hearing a lot more about the regulatory market, but I'm sure about the as well from Uma as well. And there's a history of it. There was the CDM, and I'll be talking a little bit again a little bit about it. So the voluntary carbon market is basically a decentralized market where the private sector voluntarily buy and sell carbon credits, and they represent, just like the regulatory market, the certified removals or reductions. And whereas the compliance is by some kind of a cap system, and where the system is centrally regulated either by some national government or some international body, for example, United Nations. So historically, those both markets have actually evolved. They have run in parallel for quite a number of years. After the Kyoto Protocol, or after the expiry of the Kyoto Protocol, there has been kind of a time lag or a duration lag because the new mechanism, it took some time for the new mechanism to come into effect. And now after the Article 6 of the Parliament, we have that in place, and the regulatory market is different formats of the regulatory markets are going to become effective and operational once again. But that period, the in-between period, or the gap, was very justifiably filled by the voluntary market. And what we have seen, that the VCM has really grown in that area and has established itself as one of those global brands and the credible system being recognized by a number of international bodies for their compliance purposes as well. So I think the difference between just to sum up is, one is voluntary. Again, it is regulated by some international body, but not necessarily by a national government or by a UN body, whereas the compliance markets are regulated by some international body. So just to explain that how this whole system works. So basically, this basically applies to carbon trading or carbon pricing mechanism. So the fundamental aspect of it, for it to kickstart or to become operational, is some kind of emission reduction targets are established by some international body or by some national governments for the different stakeholders or different players in the markets. And one that happens, that basically compels and that forces the different industry, corporate players, government entities, a number of other institutions to basically look out and start cutting down their emissions. Since it is not always possible for the corporate sector to cut down their emissions domestically or internally, and so this system basically provides this mechanism where they can venture out and they can actually acquire their compliance credits from somewhere else. So with the carbon pricing, what happens is basically a price stimulus, it's a price signal, and what it does is it makes the cost of doing business and services in certain sectors or across the board more expensive. because it added the additional kind of a pricing or different additional costing to the business, and that basically triggers and that compels or that incentivize the businesses for low emission options, and they can do those low emission options either internally, or if they're not able to do so, then of course they look out, and there are always opportunities for some industries, for some services or the business operations who can do this and who can reduce their emissions at a much lower cost basis, and then anything which is beyond their own compliance purposes they can bring into the market. So this basically presents this how a carbon pricing or how a carbon trading system actually works, and it works on a single principle, and that principle which has been operational and functional in the world of economics for hundreds of years, which is the price signals, and which basically triggers the action for emission reductions in the markets. So this is in a way it's nothing new in it, and this has been operational. This has been done quite successfully, not only within the GHG emission reductions, but in a number of other areas as well. I think the very first and the most successful example was undertaken in US when sulfur dioxide emissions were actually cut down through the market mechanisms, and the whole idea was taken from there and incorporated in the Paris Agreement. So quite a significant progress actually has been made when we look at from Kyoto to Paris, and a number of lessons has also been learned. As I said earlier on, Article 6, 12, and 17 of the Kyoto Protocol basically established the global carbon market, and the CDM, or the Clean Development Mechanism, was the instrument which established the rules and the methodologies for GHG emission reduction quantifications, baselines, protocol monitoring and verification, validation, and a whole set of regulatory documents and regulatory protocols which were established in the context of the CDM, and the work which was undertaken back then actually is still very much useful. So most of the methodologies which we are seeing right now in the market, they are very much based on the CDM times, and which basically provides a lot of education and system learning from that. So once the CDM was operational, so emission trading system was facilitated under the Article 17, and that established the global carbon market. In the height of the global carbon market around 2010 and 2012, there was billions of dollars of trading was happening on it, and that basically provided the proof of the concept, and that's why we're seeing that Article 6 is a very key and a very important component of the Paris Agreement. It took us time, and the parties actually took their time to establish and decide the rule book for Paris, and particularly in Article 6. And now with all the regulations established, I think the operationalization work is very much in progress, and we are going to be seeing the work and the progress under Article 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. So just to give you a slightly more kind of the differences between the compliance and the voluntary markets. In terms of the objectives, the both have very similar objectives, and the broad objective, of course, is to shifting the low emission for compliance purposes, and whereas in the voluntary market, the objective is the emission reductions for voluntary commitments. May sound a little bit different, but I think the bottom line is that it basically triggers and incentivizes emission reductions on both sides. When it comes to the carbon pricing, again, these are the market mechanisms, and the price range is very much market driven. It's supply and demand principle, which actually become into full play, and then that determines the price. In the voluntary market as well, we have seen the price ranges from $1 to $60 as well, and and there are very particular reasons for such a huge price range in the voluntary market, and we have seen those kind of variations in the compliance market as well. So some of the determining factor for the prices are, for example, the type of the project and the location of the project as well, particularly the geography of the project, and similarly, what other co-benefits a project carries with it, and a number of other determining factors as well. So the buyers in the market, they have their own kind of priorities, and they are willing.
We can't hear you, Bilal.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, now you're back online. Please go ahead.
Okay, and my presentation is visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, so sorry about that, but I think the system is not really supporting us today. Normally, it doesn't happen like that. And the product is, in case of compliance, we have the certified emission reduction CERs, and then we, for the voluntary market, there are VERs or VCUs, and technically, there is not much difference. It's just a different nomenclature, different terminology which is being used, just to have the differentiation between where a particular or specific carbon credit has been originated from. So, okay, just to give you a little how the market have reacted, how the market have evolved in the last few years, just to give you a few numbers. And this is the data which has been largely undertaken, I think mostly undertaken from the very famous World Bank report, State and Trends of the Carbon Market. They actually issue that report on an annual basis. So, but what we are seeing in the last 2 years, if we kind of have a comparative study of the last 2 years report, we see quite a tremendous growth in the carbon markets right now globally. And the growth is not only in terms of the demand for the carbon credits, but the number of initiatives, the number of new carbon pricing initiatives which are being implemented in the world. So there are 73 which has been reported right now, and in this particular report, and 39 of them are kind of a very nationally oriented initiatives, and 11.66 gigatons of emissions are actually covered under these different initiatives, which basically represent 23% of the global GHG emissions. When we look at it, I was actually trying to compare it with the McKinsey report as well, and the numbers actually turned out to be quite different, and a lot more higher numbers in the McKinsey report as compared to the World Bank. But I think the World Bank sees their role and the kind of support they're providing to the country, so they have kind of a more informative and credible data. So 23% actually is a pretty good number representation of the GHG emissions. So if at this stage in time, actually the markets are supporting the 23% of the GHG emissions. I think this is really good, and once again actually shows the strength. It shows the proof of the concept that how pivotal and how important role the carbon markets can play once they become fully functional, become a lot more spread out. When we look this into the kind of a spread into the regional basis, we see quite a lot of action actually coming out in two particular regions. One is of course Europe and Central Asia, and the other one is East Asia and Pacific. Again, actually it's kind of understandable. Europe, because of Europe happening to be having one of the old carbon market, EU ETS or EU emission trading system, and that has been functional for nearly 20 years now, and under the EU mechanism, so almost all the EU countries are under some kind of a compliance regime, and they have to demonstrate and show their reduction in their emission reductions as well. And the other one is Asia and Pacific, and again, China, because being the biggest polluter right now, they are actually coming up with a very ambitious kind of a plan for the carbon market, and you'll see that the kind of the projected numbers which are out there in terms of the size of the Chinese carbon market once it becomes fully spread out and become fully functional. But it basically shows the spread. It basically shows that the whole concept has been now recognized, has been integrated into the national climate action plans across the board. And the countries are actually seeing that this might be one of the stepping stones towards their emission reductions and the kind of commitments they have demonstrated, they have committed through their NDCs. On the right hand side, you see this bar chart which shows the kind of a distribution between the carbon taxes, which is one of the mechanism, and the emission trading system. And you see that again, kind of evolution which is happening from 2006 up to now, that the scope and the distribution for carbon taxing is actually decreasing. It still is very valid and it's being applied by a number of countries, but we're seeing that there's quite a shift which is happening globally from carbon taxing and other carbon pricing mechanism to emission trading systems, which again basically shows that these mechanisms are going to be playing a much bigger role in the coming years and the decades as well. So so this basically shows the evolution and the comparative size of the national carbon market. So we basically, as I already mentioned, there's quite a mushrooming and the growth of national level carbon which are being happening, and we're seeing a number of countries in Asia, even in Africa and Europe already is in the loop. They are actually coming up with their own national level schemes as well. At the next level, okay, once again, apologies. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So as I said that we're seeing, I mean, this is just a small sample of the different markets which are evolving. I think the most notable kind of a bar of the information here is the current size of the Chinese market, which is basically covering the 4,500 metric tons, but it is projected to grow quite significantly in the coming years, and that's what we're seeing, that this is going to be the largest once become fully operational. It still is one of the largest, but it's going to become quite largest carbon market in the world. On the other hand, when we see that EU ETS, as I said, this is the oldest carbon market, and but in terms of the size and the volume, it is not as big as compared to the Chinese market. So I think the point here is to basically just to note down that the different countries, even in one region, they're coming up with the national level systems, the national level schemes, and that basically offers that if there is some kind of a consolidation and uniformity which is happening, that offers a wonderful opportunity that the countries actually come up with some kind of a linking mechanism, and the different trading schemes can actually start trading and start taking benefit from each other. China and Pakistan actually provide this a wonderful opportunity, being one of the China being one of the biggest trade partners and the kind of the linkages and the relationship we enjoy with China, I think Pakistan, once it has its own scheme, and it can actually benefit from China, because what we know that China is going to be having quite a huge demand for carbon credit, and Pakistan actually can offer through its supply to the Chinese. Okay, just to give you a kind of a price trajectory of the carbon credits, and I think the one thing to note here is price has not been stable, and we have seen the area of phases where the price have quite significantly dropped as well, and as I said, this market is heavily dependent on the regulation, international climate policy regulation, and the because that's where the demand is driven from. So with the before the Paris Agreement 2015, we have seen quite a huge variation in the market, and then after 2015 as well, we've seen the variation, because it wasn't absolutely clear that what role the carbon markets are going to be playing. And so this basically shows at one end that the prices has been kind of up and down or volatile to some extent, but I think the trend to be noted here is there is kind of a continuous increase, and this is estimated or forecasted to increase in the coming years. So why carbon markets? I think it's good to know. It's good to note down some of the advantages of the carbon markets. I think one thing is, which I already kind of emphasized a lot, which is the flexibility of it. It allows flexibility, and it allows the industry to choose whether to cut their own emissions or kind of take a more cost-effective approach, and make use of the offsetting mechanism by buying the carbon credits or the emission reductions from the market. The way the rules and regulations have evolved, it basically enforces the additionality, and additionality means that the credit or the emission reductions are additional, so they are not business as usual. And one of the advantage of it is that the mechanism of the requirements can be designed to make sure that every single emission reduction actually is real, is credible. The other thing is measurability, and now with the approaches and the quantification methodology is very well established in the last 20 odd years, and so it provides the measurability, it provides and ensures the credibility through monitoring, reporting, and verification, and the number of players and the stakeholders who have actually gained the expertise in those areas as well. The most important part is the innovation, because it is built on the principle of economic incentives. So that basically fosters the technological innovations for reductions, and we have seen that, and we know that the climate tech solutions and the innovation for emissions, reducing the emissions in different industries is actually taking is making quite a lot of progress, and through this economic incentives, actually, the innovation component of the innovation curve can be strengthened quite significantly. So this is a very simplified version of a cycle of a carbon reduction project, and normally back in the UNFCCC or CDM days, we used to present a very complex pictures, but it is very kind of purposefully, I didn't want to make and look things very complicated, but this actually offers, it has a kind of a key components, but this, I just want a word of caution that this is a very simplified version of it. So a kind of a scoping, an idea has to be generated where the emission reduction kind of has to be assessment or evaluation has to be done, built on some financial technical studies, project boundary, GHG accounting system, ecosystem services, and all those areas need to be identified at a very early stage. The next stage is designing and validation, where either the industry or the company is going to be putting the funding from its own sources, or it is going to be securing funding from somewhere else. A methodology has to be chosen and applied. There are number of methodologies which are already available within the VCM or within the compliance market as well. And in most of the project cases, those methodologies are already valid and they are already applicable. So not a lot of work has to be done, but in some cases, if there is an element of innovation there, then a new methodology has to be designed. And then monitoring evaluation framework, once the project is passed through this, it has to be registered in one of these schemes. And after the registration, the implementation starts, and then monitoring, reporting, verification, and all those areas. So I think this basically present a kind of a very high level overview of how a project can be designed and how a project actually starts from the scoping stage or the initial design stage all the way to the trading of the emission reductions and having the emission reduction to be verified by some third party. So last two, carbon market, what is the potential for Pakistan? Well, we know that there's quite a huge potential. Pakistan, because Pakistan is now an evolving economy. Industry is actually looking for to reduce the carbon footprint for a number of reasons. There is kind of a compliance requirement for export-oriented industries, but at the same time, even the corporate sector here is very vigilant and very forthcoming. And I think it's about 23 or 24 local companies have already declared themselves to be net zero. So, but I think in addition to that, in our NDC, we have also committed to reduce 50% of overall projected emissions by 2030. So that itself actually provides quite a lot of scope for emission reductions and the scope for the carbon markets to play their role as well. I think there's a need for Article 6 to be translated, to be implemented, and then the financing mechanism, regulatory mechanism to be erected and to be implemented by the government. So I think what is needed right now, or what is missing, is the institutional and procedural framework which need to be established. And of course, the industry basically need to internalize what kind of steps and the mechanism they need to establish and they need to adhere to take benefit from the carbon markets. In the corporate sector, I already mentioned that there's 24 companies voluntarily declared to become net zero by 2030. Some of them by 2050. I think this offers quite a promising kind of a potential which can be realized. And then especially the export-oriented companies, they have to comply with a range of international requirements. CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which particularly applies to our textile sector, and we know that there's quite a lot big textile sector in Pakistan, and they are complying, and they are actually looking for the ways to comply with it. Similarly, energy sector, which actually is again offers quite a huge potential for carbon markets and mitigation options which need to be financed. So carbon financing can provide this much needed financing for the corporate sector, and that's one of the reasons actually we as NDRMF actually organizing these webinar series so that we can support the corporate sector in their efforts. So why we are doing this? We basically have been asked and directed by our board of directors, and this is a very essential part of our strategic framework as part of our mid to long-term strategy. And so in this regard, in terms of the operationalization of this strategy, we will be assisting the government bodies for establishing the policy and regulatory frameworks for integrating carbon market as part of the climate action program, because we strongly believe that it can become an instrument for transitional financing. And at the same time, we'll be working with the private sector and assisting to align their sustainability and compliance regimes and requirements with the international regulatory market. So we will be developing, I think, starting from this awareness campaign, we'll be developing a number of guidance tools and instruments for different industries, covering the technical aspects, how they can quantify their emission reductions, what kind of monitoring, reporting, verification systems they need, we're providing a hands-on training, a number of other mechanisms, number of other instruments which are in the pipeline to be rolled out in the coming months. So as I said, this is part of our mid to long-term strategy, and so we will be internalizing, we'll be integrating quite a number of actions and initiatives in this particular area. So I thank you very much. Apologies for all these different breaks in the presentation. Fawad, over to you.
Thank you so much. That's quite an information, I'm sure, and our guests would have questions as well, which we will take at the end. Now, moving towards Uma, I think you mentioned quite a number of opportunities as well as the challenges facing and how to proceed. A lot of us probably do not even know how to proceed because there are projects, there are investments made, and the cycle is not known to people. So a lot of potential goes away in that particular case. One of the few things which were very sparkling there were South Asia's 1% almost in that particular case. The credit pricing, which you mentioned, and the fact that post-Kyoto Protocol, the governments haven't really been able to attract the private sector go towards that is maybe because of the pricing as well. You did mention a very important aspect, and it's a big range actually, which you mentioned, $1 to $60 for that matter. And then obviously, where is the financing going to come from? I'll stop here till the time we open for questions and discussions with the participants. May I now request Uma to go ahead and present to us the Understanding Carbon Markets and Potential for Pakistan. Being the Regional Collaboration Center for MENA and South Asia, you're the carbon pricing regional expert and the expert on Article 6, 6.24, and 8. So we would like to hear from you and learn, how do you see the overall thing? How do you see the MENA region doing in that? And then maybe shed some light on the overall UNFCCC's overall consolidated approach, which they intend to deliver through the 6 RCCs they have in place. And as the Secretariat approach on how to support the developing and developed countries, because there's a lot of potential in the area. Over to you, Uma. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are completely audible. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thanks for the introduction. My name is Uma Maheshwaran. I'm from our Regional Collaboration Center of MENA and South Asia. This is an outfit of UNFCCC based out of Dubai. My role here is primarily on kind of operationalizing Article 6 and carbon pricing in 30 MENA and the South Asian countries. So with this as short introduction, I will now get into the presentation. First and foremost, I need to thank Bilal for setting the stone in terms of giving the overview about what's the carbon market and what are the carbon pricing, how Pakistan can get benefit out of it. I'll be covering more on the regulatory and the current status of the voluntary, and most importantly on the Article 6 and the regulatory mechanism which is coming in the compliance side. So we all know what is Article 6, but Article 6 itself is a kind of a new concept, at least it's a 2 to 3 year old concept, and which has a lot of new rules coming on a monthly basis, because last week we had the 7th session of the Article 6.4 supervisory body. So many people are not aware that what is supervisory body. Just to say on this in the Article 6.4 language. So it is the executive board of the article. In the CDM we had executive board. In here we are going to have supervisory body. With a short introduction, I'll now get into the presentation. So I am not going into detail of this. Previous colleagues have well mentioned that the country level emissions of the Pakistan is very much below the 1% of the global emissions, but that is also helping us in kind of giving a good amount of mitigation opportunities. And in the last leg of Bilal, he has very clearly mentioned what all the projects, what all the sectors which can kind of come up in agriculture, in industries, and already there are 24 companies have taken the voluntary initiative of getting into net zero pathways. So that's a good thing to see. Even though we have emissions which are of less than 1 billion, but still there is a good amount of interest from the private sector to take up the net zero commitments and taking it further. That's on the private sector, but on a country level, how the whole game works is primarily going to be on the industry. So we will discuss about that as well. So the first part, which is the domestic and the international, I'm not going to speak much here because Bilal has covered very detailed into this. There is a couple of points which I really wanted to cover in this slide is that we all know the carbon market is now it's going to be 2 decades, and I had the privilege to get myself into the carbon market starting with the 2007 when the CDM was in its kind of a peak days. So that's where I got an opportunity to get myself into the carbon market. Since then, we have seen the good amount of positive as well as good amount of learning in terms of the Kyoto Protocol and followed by the development of the voluntary carbon markets over the last 10 to 15 years, over the last 10 years. So what happened is at the end of the day, everything kind of boils down to the monetary value of every certificate or every carbon credit which has been issued by the respective methodology or the respective standard which has been followed by the project owner. So the prices, as you have seen also from the previous slide, the prices have kind of gone from $5 to $1 in the year 2011 to 2014, 2017. So then again, the voluntary market kind of got reached into its peak where the emission, the cost of the emission reductions have gone up to $7. What I'm saying is primarily for the non-NBS project, but if you're talking about the NBS and the cute projects, we call the gold standard or the highly sustainable oriented projects, they fetch around $20 as well. But they're all like kind of a very few projects, and we can count those projects globally, how they are getting high premium price for it. So now we are in a situation where the voluntary market has consolidated and the new domestic ETS is coming up, be it as kind of a part of the carbon price, part of the commitments to the NDCs, and the latest regulation specific to the compliance market is Article 6, which is also under formulation. So we all expect that the cost of the carbon pricing will go more than more than $15. I will not put a ceiling onto this, but we all expect it should cost around $30 to $40 in the next 5 to 6 years based on the reports which is going to be submitted in a couple of years on the NDC, which is 2025, because in 2025 every country is going to have a summit. So with this kind of a short what happened in the last 2 decades, I'll now kind of give a small overview about what's this kind of a share of the voluntary as well as the compliance market. See, compliance market is still playing the major role in terms of the overall share of the pie. So we all know that from where the number comes out. The number comes out, the largest share of the compliance market is primarily based on the EU ETS. EU ETS kind of accepted the emission reduction from the developing world till 2012 with the possibility of having CDM as a kind of one of the important tool considered the global mitigation opportunity with a lot of market-based approach, which is now kind of formulated. However, in post 2012, because of the Kyoto Protocol collapse, so things could not mature onto the linking of the EU ETS with the other domestic mechanisms. However, but still the EU ETS considered to be one of the largest markets in the global arena in terms of the compliance market, and followed by we have voluntary markets which is the kind of used by the companies who try to take up their own commitments of emission reduction. So with the current new standards like SCTA or CDP, they have kind of very stringent regulation in terms of using the carbon offset, which also kind of gives an opportunity for the project developers to develop highly integrated kind of environmentally integrity-oriented carbon reduction projects in various countries. So with this, I would now go to the next slide, which I'll be covering about what is the carbon pricing. So we have carbon pricing is a tool which is a kind of a process where you fix a price to a emission reduction, and then you can try to map it with multiple approaches. As what Bilal also mentioned in his previous slide, which is also talking about the EU, which is talking about the emission trading scheme, carbon tax. There are a lot of innovative methodologies which are already there under the carbon pricing. But as of now, we can see that all the more than 50 large economic countries, they already have the carbon pricing in them. And 41 already have kind of a carbon tax or ETS based system. One of the live example is that we have the European Union emission trading scheme, which is kind of one of the longest emission trading scheme, which is kind of even allocates the allowances price in a week in terms of the private companies will have an opportunity to trade the emission reductions on a close intervals as well. So this gives a kind of an opportunity for every country to kind of see the learnings and the methodologies that have been formulated by QETS over the past 10 to 15 years and try to see how the ETS can become a kind of a carbon pricing or emission reduction tool for the respective country, which can be finally accounted in the NDC. The reason I was kind of emphasizing on this is that Pakistan is also now trying to come up with its own domestic ETS. It would be appropriate time for us to kind of put together a kind of decent and a proper framework which can try to get the emission reduction trajectory into a better shape. So as you all know that there are a lot of countries which also use carbon tax as a kind of a parallel mechanism to the emission trading. There are ETS market link mechanism as well as the carbon tax. So let us not get into this. It will take at least minimum 1 or 2 days to discuss the good the pros and cons of both the methodologies. As we all know that the China has recently kind of again kind of agreed to the domestic carbon market, which was kind of on hibernation mode few months ago, and now they are coming up. India, Brazil, Japan. There are other countries also. They kind of created their carbon pricing plan specifically on the ETS system. So we all know that what is the carbon market, what is carbon pricing, but how it is regulated on the global level. So we have the complaints and we have the global compared to the voluntary market on the global level. And on the complaints market, it is always UNFCCC, which is kind of a supreme body which is governing all the rules and regulations specific to the complaints market. We had CDM from 2005 to 2012, but it's kind of in its final stages of conclusion, because we now have Article 6.2 and Article 6.4 under the Paris Agreement, which is kind of clearly giving the information about how the bilateral cooperation can happen between two countries, how the Article 6.4, which is the second generation of CDM, how the private companies can work on developing mitigation projects which will help the country in the NDC commitment. It's not that Article 6.2 doesn't call for the attention of the private sector. It's also very much imperative that private sector plays a very important role in the Article 6.2 for its implementation as well. Because end of the day, though the government-to-government cooperation happens, the final real mitigation activities are taken on the ground by the private sector participants. So with this, on the voluntary markets, we have independent standards like gold standard, DERA, which Bilal also covered in his slides, which will tell a kind of a parallel market which run to aim to create a mitigation actions in the process which can be used for voluntary activities. We will now cover what's the difference between the complaints of the voluntary carbon markets in terms of its application in the NDC. So now going back into Article 6. Article 6 is one of the innovative tool comes under the Paris Agreement, which facilitates any party, any country, to reduce their emissions to cooperation between other countries. In our jargon, we call country as a party. So that's why you can see here most of the words like parties here. So the first Article 6 is nothing but the paragraph 6 of the article of the Paris Agreement. Under Article 6, we still have subparagraph. The first paragraph, which will be of 6.2, which will be talking about the cooperation happens between two countries, like for example Pakistan and Japan, or Pakistan and China, where the emission reductions are kind of internationally transferred. So when we say the emission reductions, it is kind of the mitigation outcomes which is getting transferred between on the international level. So that kind of finally taken towards the achievement of the NDC target. So there is a clear guidance which has been given under the paragraph number 2 of the CMA. CMA is the supreme body which meets once in a year in COP, along the guidelines of the COP, to come up with the rules and regulations for how the Article 6.2 overall on the Article 6 how it works out to be. So we expect a good amount of information can be coming out of the COP, which is going to happen in Dubai by end of this year. And the Article 6.4, it is a standard thing which was there for the last 10 to 15 years at CDM. We have a good amount of learning with the CDM. We have multiple projects registered, multiple emission reduction targets of emission reductions have been achieved by a lot of private companies, and a good amount of revenue has also been achieved globally by implementing CDM projects. So now this whole CDM process and the whole CDM is going to be shifted from CDM to Article 6.4. I'll be discussing more on the process, how the how the CDM project is also going to be moved to Article 6.4 in the next slide. The last important market-based mechanism we call in Article 6 of Paris Agreement, Article 6.8, but here it is, we call it as a non-market-based approach, where it doesn't involve the transfer of mitigation outcomes. However, it involves a kind of cooperation between two countries, wherein the countries can kind of reach out to mitigation and as well as adaptation goals along with the co-benefits. I'll be happy to take up detailed discussion on this in terms of what are the projects which could be covered under Article 6.8. So now we need to understand that what is Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. So a country which is doing its mitigation outcome through Article 6.2, how it happens. Let's say that China is having its own set of rules and regulations, wherein Pakistan is already having a rules and set of regulations, and which have a cooperation agreement with China, and China is supporting Pakistan with some financial and technical support with regard to the activities which is happening. There is no direct involvement of UNFCCC in setting the process between the two countries. However, it is up to the two participating countries to devise their own methodologies, devise their own sectors, devise their own calculation of the emission reduction, devise their own MRV framework. However, when you are on a global arena, it has to be addressing on the three important words. It has to be real, it has to be additional, it has to be verifiable. So whatsoever be the sector which has been chosen by the country, it has to be properly kind of addressing the three important points. The emission reduction has to be real, it should be additional, and it should be verifiable on a long run. So then these emission reductions are transferred as a kind of ITMOS, which kind of goes into the from one country to other country to an international registry, which is part of the UN system, which will account the emission reductions under the NDC targets. So on the other side, we have the Article 6.4, which is the second generation of CDM kind of a process. There is a good amount of steps involved in this. It is a straightforward approach. In the Article 6.2, it was a cooperation. Here it is a mechanism. So that's the difference between 6.2 and 6.4. So when the 6.4 and 6.2 is already there operational, it has to be authorized by the host party. Meaning to say Pakistan should authorize what all the sectors which I'm going to consider under Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. There is no golden rule that if I am having 4 sectors in Article 6.2, it should not be there in Article 6.4. It can be a mixture of multiple sectors. It can have a overlap between these two mechanisms. So if there is a acceptance of the host party on the respective sector, the emission reductions or the ITMOS which is coming out can be used towards NDCs. It can be used in other mitigation processes, and it can be used for both as well. And this will finally kind of used as a corresponding adjustment for countries NDC. Let us say that if Pakistan says that I'm not going to use those particular sectors for my under the cooperation agreement between 6.2 and 6.4, then those sectors are and the emission reduction can be used for domestic ETS mechanisms or voluntary purposes, which will eventually not get qualified under the corresponding adjustments. Let us say that there is a good amount of so that's the difference between the Article 6.2 and 6.4. So now the carbon market has evolved from a to a kind of a different paradigm where it's not north-south cooperation. It is a cooperation which happens cooperation happens across the globe. Like emission reductions can be transferred between, for example, India, Pakistan, because in the past incident, India and Pakistan was always a kind of a seller, but here in Article 6.2 and Article 6, we have the flexibility. Even the developing country can cooperate among each other to reduce emissions. Likewise, from like what we have in the earlier regime, we have the participation between non-annexed and annexed countries. So now the overall market-based mechanism is on the global level. But as I mentioned earlier, whatsoever happens, it has to have the three golden words, which will link with it has to be real, meaning to say it has to be authorized. You have to have a tracking, so you need to have the tracking of all the emission reductions which are achieved in the respective project on a respective country, and then it has to be reported on an initial report, followed by a biannual report, which is going to be submitted to the UNFCCC for the NDC commitment. So there is an electronic registry has to be in place, meaning to say any project which is coming up in the respective host party, it has to have a kind of a database. It will be talking about all the project sectors, when the project is generating emission reductions, and how it is getting generated, how it is reducing the emissions, and how it is monitored. It is not necessary that the host party should have its own registry. It can also partner with other registries which are available in the global mechanism, where they can try to use the other infrastructure for themselves. Finally, the overall mechanism will be linked into the NDC commitments and the transparency framework through a centralized accounting and reporting framework. In our language, we call it as a SARC, which will be the kind of a global IT platform where all the projects from multiple mechanisms are kind of monitored, so that the double counting and the transparency can be addressed. So as of now, a lot of Article 6.2 piloting already happening across worldwide. As per the UNEP-RESO, the current Article 6.2 pilots are around 23 projects across globe. Ghana is leading with 9 projects, followed by Senegal, Morocco, Peru. Many countries are active, as I mentioned, in this. And the most important thing is that you need to come up with the positive list and the negative list. You need to say what are the sectors which I'll be using it for my Article 6.2, meaning to say, like for example, India, Morocco, they have come up with their own list of projects which can take part in 6.2. In case of Morocco, they have selected cement sector as one of the target area where they would like to develop Article 6.2 projects, because the emission reduction will be more expensive for me to do it by my own self to reduce emissions. So Morocco has kind of opened its door to a cement industry from the global level. What all the projects which can fall under the cement sector, which are kind of directly kind of reducing the emissions, which can be developed under Morocco and can be used for NDC. So the reason to make it as a kind of a short thing, if I have a very with my margin abatement cost curve, if I have my emission reductions are going to be very expensive, there we can try to call in the international cooperation with the technology or with the financial support from other countries, and we can try to address this emission reduction. But end of the day, the emission reduction which is going to happen in the country is a kind of a sovereign property. So there has to be a proper guided mechanism to calculate the marginal abatement cost for the respective sectors, and then to try to analyze which are the sectors I'll be taking under Article 6.2, 6.4, and then finally kind of creating a framework, institutional framework to go for it. So on the institutional framework, how it works, it has to be a kind of an office, to be very precise. So this office will act as the nodal agency for implementation of Article 6.2. When we say that nodal agency, it has to kind of record all the projects, it has to record all the authorization, it has to report to the UNFCCC. It's a kind of a I will not use the word DNA, but it's a kind of a DNA which will be kind of managing all the projects which are coming under Article 6.2 precisely in the respective country. So with this, now I will now get into Article 6.4. I'm not going to detail into this because everyone knows that it's a simple transition of CDM and JA projects to the market-based mechanism or to a mechanism. So here we call it as a 6.4. But the most important thing is that the emission reduction should be additional, as we had the same philosophy what we had in CDM, which was also mentioned by Bilal in his presentation. And the most important thing is that the country should have a Article 6.4 DNA. And luckily, we have Pakistan Article 6.4 DNA in place. As of now, it's only 50 plus countries they have Article 6.4 DNA globally, whereas we have around 196 parties as a signatory to Paris Agreement. So many countries are still trying to list their Article 6.4 DNA into the UNFCCC. As I mentioned earlier, Article 6.4 is DNA is very important. So let us say that we have the institution in place. What is the next thing which has to be done? The next thing which has to be done is that again we have to get into the positive list and the negative list, meaning to say what is the positive sectors which will be targeted for Article 6.4 projects. What are the activities which will be kind of agreed and allowed in the mechanism, and how I can kind of manage these mitigation outcomes in a way which is like kind of in terms of the marginal abatement cost. Like if it is very expensive, I will call for international support. If it is a low cost effort for me, I will do it by my own self, meaning the country can do it by its own self and they can account it in their NTC commitments. So that's the way the overall process works. The most important thing is that the Article 6.4 DNA is that it has two important points. When you kind of establish the institutional mechanism, so what the institution will do, the institutional will create a framework and create a possible environment for the private sector to invest in Article 6.4 to generate projects, to develop projects which will generate emission reduction. And then those emission reductions which are coming out of the Article 6.4 are called Article 6.4 𝐸R. That's the first point. And let's say that the first Article 6.4, when it is getting transferred from Pakistan to, let's say, to China, it is going to be called ITMOS, and this is going to be kind of authorized. Let us say that there are a list of projects which Pakistan doesn't authorize, then we call them as mitigation contribution units, which can be used for other kind of a process. It can be used for domestic purpose, it can be used for participation for voluntary purpose. So on the first one, we call it as authorized. On the second one, we call it as a non-authorized. All those authorized emission reductions kind of directly get into the framework of corresponding adjustments, and countries can take up the NDC charges along with that. Non-authorized will go into the other actions like domestic ETS or voluntary mechanisms. So I mentioned multiple times that we have CDM, and CDM is Article 6.4 is the second generation CDM. So what's the major relationship and the differences between CDM and Article 6.4? So let us go from the top. We still have CDM executive board, and which is governing the rules and regulations of the CDM. However, in case of Article 6.4, we call it as a supervisory body. In CDM, we call project participant. Here it is called activity participant. In CDM, we call country. Here we call party. So in CDM, we have certified emission reductions. Here we are having Article 6.4 𝐸R, plus we also have mitigation of contribution units. So that's on the kind of the jargon. We have a lot of jargon in CDM. We have a lot of jargons in our climate change domain. So these are some of the jargons which we should be aware of. When it comes to the mechanism as such, how it works between the developing countries. In case of the CDM, developing countries was kind of only as a seller in the past, and it just grants a letter of approval. However, in case of 6.4, the developing country has a major role in terms of not only granting the approval, it also has the contribution in terms of sustainable development, because sustainable development is a very integral part of Article 6.4 with the lifetime stakeholder consultation process, wherein the overall project can be tracked on its lifetime, so that the emission reductions can be kind of aiming towards sustainable development. In the early case, it was only the Annex 1 parties who have the obligation to the certified emission reductions for their NDCs, but in Article 6.4, even the developing countries will also have an opportunity to used in Article 6.4 ERs and Article 6.4 mechanism for their NDC commitment. So with this, I'll go to the next one. This is one of the technically speaking how the difference between the Article 6.4 and CDM works. So in Article 6.4, the host country, meaning to say the host party, can also prescribe a methodology on a country-specific approach, which will have its own baseline, which will align with its long-term goal on Paris Agreement, which will also align with the long-term in the LEDS. So that kind of a process is there. However, in the CDM, the host country did not have the possibility to establish their own baseline, and we have to follow simply the UNFCCC and the CDM Executive Board methodology. In case of the CDM, we had two types of crediting period, 10, and the second one is 3 into 7. Here it is 10 and 3 into 5. So it is kind of a reduced time frame, which is like this. Let us assume that by 2025, the Article 6.4 will be in place, and we aim to have the mechanism contribute at least till 2040, so that the emission reduction can really be additional, aiming towards the net zero by 2050. So we have the same projects as well. We do have programs as well in both the mechanisms. There is going to be infrastructure, which is called Article 6.4 registry, which will be similar to the CDM registry. The most important thing which we have here in Article 6.4, which was not there in CDM, is the grievance mechanism. In CDM, we never had an opportunity to appeal about the outcomes or the decisions made by various organizations, various bodies of which are governing the CDM. However, in case of Article 6.4, we have the possibility to agree to present our views and establish a grievance mechanisms to that. And stakeholder consultation, before the validation, we had 1 round, 4 weeks of stakeholder consultation. However, in case of Article 6.4, it is going to be a lifetime project, lifelong stakeholder consultation process throughout the project. So these are some of the information which I would like to present with regards to the Article 6.4 and CDM as a kind of differences. And the latest, as per the approved process of the Article 6.4, it is a 13-step process. The good thing is that in CDM, there was no time frame kind of timeline we have. But however, in case of Article 6.4, every step has its own independent time frame, wherein each and every step has to finish with a certain amount of timelines which are there. I'm not going to go much in detail into this. I would like to take up questions and we can answer on that. So we have good amount of projects which are there, which can kind of transit from CDM to Article 6.4. So on a global level, we have around 3,000 projects which are kind of eligible to be moved from CDM to Article 6.4. There are some of the timelines which we need to really take it up in this process. The transition process started on 30th June 2023. And the window is going to start close by 31st December 2023. And what is the first eligibility? The first eligibility is that the crediting period should start on 1st January 2021. So any project, any CDM project which has a live crediting period of 1st January 2021, they are eligible to be moved from CDM to Article 6.4. And there is a set of process which has to be followed. The first and foremost is that there has to be communication which has to be sent from the project participant from the CDM to UNFCCC through a certain form, and the form is available in the public domain. If needed, I will be happy to share the form as well. Before 31st December 2023. Once the form has been done, there is a set of process which I'll be explaining in the next slide. And the transition approval will happen from the UNFCCC side by 31st December 2025. So then we do have a flexibility here again in terms of both removals as well as the reduction projects. The reduction project is going to be 5 years, and the removal project is going to be 15 years. So once the transition happens, the project can, if they have a valid crediting period beyond 2025, also they can start generating the emission reductions. The good thing is that if you have a project, let us say that this is having a crediting period from 2020, so then if you have a crediting period of let's say 10 years, so that means from 2021 you can have the possibility to reduce the emission. You can retrocline the emission reduction, and then you can also take the emission reduction to post 2025 as well. The methodology will be the same as the CDM methodology. What you have used for your PDD registration. If there is no change in the methodology to Article 6.4 in terms of the technicalities, you will go for it. If there is a change, then we need to rework on the methodology. Post the transition, it is going to be the 6.4 methodology which will be applicable. So some of the numbers as on date, what we see is that there are around 3,328 projects which falls under this magic number of January 2021, and plus 165 POAs which are eligible for the transition. And we do aware that there are around 31 projects in Pakistan which can move from CDM to Article 6.4. The sad part is that as of now, we have only 100 plus projects which have requested for transition, and we are still figuring it out. What's the reason for the less participation? Probably maybe everyone will be coming in at the back end of this year, which is 31st December 2023. So what is the process? It's a kind of very simple process. CDM proponent has to write a form which has been published by the Article 6.4 supervisory body. They have to submit to the SB. SB will communicate to the host country. There is an X project which we receive the letter. That's a simple process. Then supervisory body will try to look into the full participation requirement and then approve the transition process. But the process which involves is that CDM proponent should hire a DOE, and he has to do the revalidation of his project, and the CDM proponent also has to pay addendum fees to supervisory body, wherein the supervisory body will do its set of process to understand whether the project is additional in terms of the baseline methodologies, and then the registration will be done in the 6.4 mechanism. With this, once the project has kind of approved for the 6.4 registration, CDM executive body will be communicated, and then it will be approved, and the project will be moved from CDM executive board registry to Article 6.4 registry. These are some of the projects, not some of these are the 31 projects which are kind of eligible to be moved from Pakistan for the CDM transition. I'll be more than happy to take up the questions later. And who are we? A small kind of introduction about the Regional Collaboration Center. We have 3 major roles in terms of doing the capacity. Regional collaboration with policy support, technical support, partnership building. We try to help the project developer, be it in the mitigation or in the adaptation side. So I am kind of dealing with the Article 6.4 and carbon pricing. We have colleagues who are dealing in NDC implementation, climate finance, adaptation, innovation. So that's the overall structure of Regional Collaboration Center. We are based out of Dubai. We'll be more than happy to be in touch with you, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Not necessarily you have to ask me now. You have my contacts. You can send us the information in future, so we can take it from there. With this, I'll finish my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll be happy to take up any questions.
Thank you so much, Amma. That was quite insightful. I think we can switch on the cameras. Thank you so much, Amma. That was quite insightful. Opportunities as well. Pakistan is starting from a mere 31 projects, moving towards markets, and then the biggest figures coming in, the share of compliance versus the VCMs 9822 and the possible opportunities in there. Since we had kept about 90 minutes for the webinar, which we are through actually with the time, but we will take some questions. I see Aftab Alam Khan. Can we unmute Aftab Alam Khan and take his questions?
Thank you very much, NDRMF, Bilal and Uma, for one of the best events that I have attended globally on carbon credits. Thank you very much. I have two comments or observation. One is that despite a lot of success of carbon markets, there are a few concerns about this arena as well. For example, one of them is that there has been fraudulent cases of carbon markets. For example, CFTC in US has recently issued guidelines for whistleblowers. And there was a study which was released early this year that also included contribution from Cambridge University about the fraudulent practices. That also included credits which were used by companies like Shell and Disney and Gucci, for example. A second concern is that how to involve communities in a way where there is an interface with the carbon credit markets, how to include communities that their rights are not violated and there is a free and prior informed consent. My question from Uma is that, Uma, keeping in view these 2 points, do you have any success stories that have addressed these concerns in MENA or elsewhere? And my question from dear Bilal Saab is that how do we plan? I hope we have a plan to integrate these concerns when we are working on the institutional mechanism for carbon credits in Pakistan. Thank you very much. I'm Aftab Alam Khan, and I'm from a Resilient Future, which is a training and research company based in Islamabad.
Thank you, Aftab sir. Uma, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, I will not answer the first question. With my hat of UNFCCC, I'm not going to get into the conversation about what's the good credit, what's the bad credit, and how it happens. So I am sorry, I'm kind of disappointing you. I'm not going to touch upon that. With regard to the second question, which is on the community, yes, we have a lot of good examples, a lot of lighthouse projects across MENA region. The communities, like even the project which is of the mangrove forest of Pakistan is also kind of a community-oriented project, so which kinds of helping the mitigations happening across the forestry, across the adaptation. So I would suggest, I would say there is a good amount of possibility that the communities can get actively involved in the process. Did this answer your question, Mr. Aftab?
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right. Bilal, you want to go ahead with responding to some of the queries here?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Aftab sir. Very valid questions. I think Uma shied away from the first question, and I think these kind of concerns has been associated with the carbon markets since its beginning. I remember in my early days in UNFCCC, I mean, there were investigative reports and which basically came out and indicated some of those kind of leakages in the system. Now, not to justify anything, but I would say that when you are establishing a global system, operating a global system, and these kind of practices do happen, but the system must actually evolve over time. And in case of carbon markets, the system has indeed evolved, and a number of kind of strengthening mechanism, regulatory robustness has been introduced. I'm not saying that this is going to be really eliminating that completely, but I think this is what we have to learn from the system. And you have to look at the benefits, the advantages, the kind of financing it was engaged, and similarly the sustainable development objectives it achieved, and a number of other kind of co-benefits from it. Now, I already mentioned, I think the communities have been very actively engaged, and we have seen some of the beautiful projects around the world entirely driven and built and implemented by the communities. So they have benefited a lot. I think going ahead, there's a number of lessons which can be integrated, which can be internalized, and I think under Article 6.4, there's a lot of responsibility on the government institution side as well, and I think the government will have to take that responsibility and build the systems which does not basically which trigger and which encourages the communities. So the work which NDRMF is actually will be doing is actually building that kind of system and guiding and supporting the government in addressing some of those issues. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We have a question from Mr. Saifullah. While we ask you to unmute and go ahead with your question, just an announcement here, Ji. The presentations made by the two presenters shall be available on our website soon after we finish the webinar. Thank you. Mr. Saifullah, please go ahead with the question.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Saifullah from Conference Headquarters. Thank you, Mr. Bilal. My first question is from Mr. Bilal, and the second as well from Mr. Bilal. In his presentation, I think it was first or second slide. He showed some trends, graphical trends of carbon emissions, and besides this, he said this investment is not sufficient to overcome this. Any efforts we are doing is not sufficient. Now, what type of investments and what type of efforts we are expecting to overcome these 1.5 degree or even 2 degree? Not 1.5 degree is very difficult. Now, for 2 degree, what do you expect? What type of investment and mitigative measures we can take so we can reach below 2 degrees? And the second question from both of the presenters, experts. What is the future and fate of carbon markets in developing world? Developing world is sufficient and smart. They have developed and they are developing. And another thing he mentioned about the Chinese carbon market with collaboration with Pakistan. So how we can, does our corporate sector or any civil society or any entity other than government can do in near future in up to 2030? And is there Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan is competent enough to have a registered or establish a registry for carbon credits? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Saifullah. I'll start off, and I'm sure Uma will chip in as well. So, in terms of the investment for kind of limiting the global average temperature between 1.5 to 2 degrees, there are so many numbers out there, and so much work has been done, and the numbers actually vary quite significantly. I think one of the report I read actually, which basically shows just for the energy transition, and which makes sense as well, because globally the energy sector actually is one of those sectors which has kind of a number of opportunities, but at the same time one of the most polluting sector as well. And the number actually runs into kind of trillions. I think it was 3 to 5 trillions from 2030 to 2050 onwards, something of this nature. So the number is pretty kind of gigantic. So which of course is not going to come from the capital markets or concessional finance, definitely not. And so a number of different financial instruments and the financial institutions have to come together, and a number of kind of financial leveraging need to take place. So the carbon markets are kind of a one instrument which is out there, which can be leveraged, which can play a kind of an important role. But I think it's not going to be the kind of an instrument which can provide or can pull out those kind of financial resources. So same in Pakistan as well. We know the kind of a situation. Our NDC have a financial figure as well. I think it's 50 billion, which is cumulatively for mitigation as well as for adaptation. I'm not too sure what is the scientific basis for that financial figure. I'm sure that some work must have been undertaken, and the number has been put there. So, but the point remains that there is a significant amount of financing is required, and there is financing gaps, and which of course the global community is still kind of grappling that how to address that. Now the second question is with regard to developing countries, and then kind of how the national level schemes, how they can kind of interact with each other, the kind of interlinkages can happen and benefit from each other. Yes, I think the possibility is there as far as the different national schemes are have the level of a degree of uniformity in their regulations and the systems and everything else, and then of course mutual recognition of the instruments as the products. So I think some work of course needed to be done, but the possibility remain there, and that can be realized. The Ministry of Climate Change, they have a mandate for that, and I'm sure that they are working. We work very closely with Ministry of Climate Change, and they have a kind of setting up the institutional as well as the regulatory sales framework with regard to 6.4, and that's one of the reasons actually we kind of helping and supporting them as well. So yeah, I'll stop here. Uma, you want to add anything?
Uma, you mute for
You
now.
muted.
There's nothing from my side. You have covered it like what it is to be there.
Mr. Bilal, are you want to add something from my side?
Uma, you want to add something? Or you good for now?
No. It's okay, but I thought Mr. Bilal was asking something from my side. Thank you.
All right. I think we will take the last question for the day for the webinar, and it's Hasnat Ashraf. Hasnat, please go ahead with your question, and this probably will be our last question for the webinar. We are overshooting the time. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Hasnat, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fawad. And first of all, I would like to congratulate you on a very good topic that is slightly new in the market, especially for Pakistan. I represent private sector, and I have two comments come questions. First is on the economics of carbon trading and carbon pricing. First, for carbon pricing, you think in a country like Pakistan, which is already dealing with higher cost of doing business and is not being competitive with the region, such activities of carbon pricing, be it voluntary or regulated, contribute to cost of doing business? If so, what can be the economics of it around this? Secondly, to this question, what are the commitments from countries like China and India, who are one of the leading contributors to the GHG emissions? Are they committing themselves towards carbon pricing? If not, then why should Pakistan? My second question is about standardization. When we talk about carbon credits, there has to be certain carbon accounting standards. I want to pick your brain. Where is Pakistan as a country ready to have those accounting standards? If so, what sort of global best practices are benchmarks available to adopt those carbon accounting standards? Thank you.
Thank you, Hasnat. Uma, you may go ahead first, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go from the reverse of the questions. So in terms of the accounting and the mechanisms we have, there are multiple mechanisms or multiple accounting principles across the so if you can divide them into two kind of a thing. One is on the compliance, one is on the voluntary. In terms of the compliance, anything which is going for directly for the NDC, we call it as a compliance, and anything which is going for voluntary, we call it as a voluntary. Just to name the accounting, so when you are saying that you have a project and the project is going to generate emission reduction, and how you will say how the project is going to be generating the emission reduction, you need to have a formula, and you need to say that the project is additional. So these are the two parameters. One is that I need to set my baseline. Let us say that in the country I have diesel which is utilized mostly for my boilers across in all my textile industry. So now I'm replacing my boiler in my factory from diesel to biomass. So this is something which is additional to what's happening in the baseline. That means that my project is reducing emissions compared to the business as usual scenario. And how will I say that my project is reducing the emissions? I'm having X ton of diesel which is getting saved for why ton of steam which is getting produced on a daily basis. So there is a process, there is a methodology which is kind of there in place for each and every related project activity. In our CDM world, we call it as a methodology. As of now, CDM has more than 200 plus methodology applicable for more than 500 plus kind of activities. So that's the accounting kind of a thing. The second last question which you asked, like why Pakistan should do, what is it happening across globally in terms of the other countries' commitment. Precisely for India has decided that they will go for a net zero kind of target. They have taken the net zero target by 2070. The country will be net zero, so that they have taken. And achieving net zero is not just kind of saying it like that. You need to have multiple process, multiple steps, multiple concepts which has to go. In one of the concepts is the carbon pricing. Carbon pricing has multiple methodologies, multiple concepts. So one concept is the ETS, emission trading scheme, which domestically I'll use for my emission reduction. That's what India has taken up. Likewise, if you're talking about EU on a global level, on an overall level, they also have EU ETS, which is a kind of a carbon pricing tool which is there in place for the last 15 years. And why Pakistan has to take a call in terms of getting into this? Because Pakistan also has a possibility to enter into the mitigation spectrum, where it can get capital inflow to the country in terms of generating mitigation outcomes, which will kind of facilitate the emission reduction project which will happen in the country. So that's one of the reasons Pakistan can try to take up the carbon pricing or mitigation for this. I kind of lost the first question. Sorry, you have to tell me the first question. Or I think Bilal take up the first question. Sorry.
Thank you. Bilal, you want to respond? Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. We can't hear you now.
Okay, yeah. No, I think.
Please go ahead. We can hear you now.
Okay. No, I think Umar kind of explained it already. Just to mention, I think about the methodologies and the accounting standards. I think a fair amount of our work has already been done, and Pakistan have a kind of a success of registering the projects under CDM as well, and so that kind of expertise and the understanding to some extent is available in the market, which can be, of course, further elaborated, further extended. Now, why Pakistan should be opting out? Of course, Pakistan should not be opting for net zero, although, having not a very high emissions, it might be relatively easier for Pakistan. But at the same time, Pakistan have this kind of ambition of going for taking the kind of a path on the economic growth, and emissions are going to grow. So mitigation becomes very, very important. At the same time, I think Pakistan have the marginal abatement cost for several industries and several areas in Pakistan is pretty low. I don't know the right now, I don't have the data with me, but when we were writing the first NDC, we did that work and we calculated the marginal abatement cost for several industries. And it was quite astonishingly low. And I used to say that in my kind of public speeches and public talkings, that Pakistan is a carbon investment haven. And many international players should actually look out for Pakistan for investment for mitigation purposes. I'm pretty sure that that still is very much the case. So as Umar already mentioned that, yes, I mean, we can become part of the global mitigation efforts and ambitions. And at the same time, we can attract the investments into Pakistan and also help our industry to transition to the new and low emission technologies as well. So the promise is there and the potential is there. And that's one of the reasons actually the government is very ambitious and very much interested to go ahead with these kind of initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, Hassan, you did get your answer. Just like to add one point here, that while there's a lot of opportunity out there, and especially from the presentations we saw, China's numbers actually and being neighbors, I think there's a lot of opportunity to come up with projects and to actually generate carbon credits and to sell them. But still, there's a word of caution in certain industries where we are to be connected to the world out there. For instance, just as a reference, let's say airline industry. So the emissions have to be a certain level in order for us to be landing at different airports around the globe starting next year or so. So maybe a small percentage for now, but that might just fall as a compliance on us. But a lot of ground still remains as opportunities. I thank you, Bilal Anwar. I thank you, Uma Krishnan. I thank you all the participants for a successful webinar. Thank you all. The presentations, as I mentioned, will be available on the website, and we remain available for any queries or concerns or questions. And participants might have jotted down the email addresses and contacts of the presenters as well. So if there are any questions, please throw them to us. We will respond to you directly. If you want to send questions to the presenters, they are available. This was a very introductory sort of a webinar today with just two presenters. We intend to move ahead with this agenda, and as raised by our participants today as well, that the idea is pretty new. The information is not there with the people. So all we're trying to do is play our part of an enabler here and bridging the gaps actually. Thank you so much. You have a very good day. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you so much.